Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we're on a mission to answer 4 questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So with that, we are pleased to announce our special guest for this episode, Thomas Weidley. So Thomas, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Yep, thanks for having me on.
Oh, we're glad that we were finally able to make this work. So do us a favor, introduce yourself to our listeners, kind of who you are, what you do, a bit of your background, basically the whole scoop on Thomas.
All right. My name's Tom Weidley. My aviation call sign is Wheels, but I am a 34-plus year Marine Corps veteran. Spent most of my time in the aviation community. I was a attack helicopter pilot flying Cobras, and
nice.
I had just a tremendous career in the Marine Corps. Mostly flying and then in leadership billets all the way through at every echelon of aviation command. So tremendous time in the Marine Corps. I retired in 2021 and got on with a company called Capewell, which did aerial delivery and survivability solutions. That company started out originally as the chief operating officer and then moved up to be the chief executive officer. And then that company, portions of that company sold in August of last year. And so I transitioned with the parts of the business that did not sell. That was the aerial machine and tool portion of the business. And so now I'm in charge of that particular component of the business. So we do survivability solutions, all of your aviation survival gear, all the gear that I wore, that my buddies wore in the squadrons, from vests to small little scuba bottles that you have when you fly over water, to flotation that you wear around your collar or around your waist. All those things are products that Ariel makes and has made for decades. So super easy to get wedded to the mission, and my way to give back was that if I could do something to help contribute to service members coming home to their families at the end of the day, or being able to accomplish their mission, that I wanted to do that, and Ariel gives me the vehicle to do so.
100%. No, that is awesome. That's kind of almost like retiring from the fire department and going to work for a company that makes turnout gear and firefighter safety gear. It's like it's just a natural part of what you've been doing for so many years. I mean, it just kind of eases right on from one to the other. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was obviously transitioning to the civilian side after decades in the Marine Corps. It made it super easy because it was everything that I was familiar with in terms of the products and the solution set. So
nice. Well, and being in aviation too. I mean, that's the gentleman I was telling you about that from the Coast Guard. His whole career is aviation. Fixed wing and helicopter. Although I think he gets bored and goes to sleep if he tries to do fixed wing. He's just not a fixed wing fan. He's like, what's the fun? It's kind of it's helo or nothing. I mean, especially if you think Coast Guard, you're sitting there trying to hover above, in the Arctic Sea, trying to pick somebody out, in 30-foot waves. It's kind of just a routine fixed wing flight. Just doesn't quite do it for you after that,
Yeah. Well, especially too, if you can't shoot, it's not quite the same. So shoot something off your aircraft, drop something. So. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, it was funny though, growing up in Hampton Roads, as soon as you mentioned a Cobra, the first thing I thought about is the, Cobra versus Apache. I want to say go,
Yeah.
It's kind of like they get all the glory, but it's like, man, Cobra's a workhorse, man.
Yeah, they both have their strengths. So yeah, great platforms for what they do. Yeah.
Nice.
That's my political way to stay neutral in this.
I don't blame you. I was just saying, you sell stuff for both, so it's not, they're just different.
That's right. Yeah, just different. Yeah.
Well, I know growing up in the kind of Cold War era, it's like you think about which one of these could take out one of these, Himes, one of these floating tanks.
Yeah, who can take out the most ground vehicles, other helicopters? It was always the goal.
Yeah. No, I remember the first time I saw it on TV when the Soviets kind of came out with their Hind helicopter, and this thing was seemed like a C-130 with a prop on top. It's like, my God, could you make anything bigger or slower? But it was a machine, man. That thing was a beast.
Yeah, very effective and very survivable. So Not as good as a Cobra and Apache though. So
No. There was not a bit. It's kind of like the turning the aircraft carrier. This thing is so big, man. It's kind of like it'll get there eventually. Where those
yeah.
things are just, like I said, nimble beasts that we have. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about some of the things in your career when you're in the Marines.
Yeah, like I said, I started out like all Marines do, learning how to be an infantry officer, and then went to flight school and selected Cobras and learned to fly Cobras. And shortly after getting to my first operational squadron, we went overseas for 9 months in support of Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Nice.
So got to fly and employ my craft there. After that, came back, and in the Marine Corps, you do certain numbers of deployments, rotations. If you're in the operational forces, you rotate, and so did multiple deployments to Okinawa. Did a tour at our fighter weapons school called MOTS 1, Marine Aviation's Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1 in Yuma. I was, went on board ship and as part of a Marine Expeditionary Unit. I was the air officer, so I provided support to the commander in terms of how to best employ his aviation assets and do all kinds of planning and stuff. I was fortunate enough to be able to command a squadron and took that squadron over to Iraq, 2005-2006 timeframe. I did a couple of tours at Manpower. I did a tour at Central Command.
Nice.
I was able then also to command at the group level. So we had 11 subordinate squadrons when I was a group commander on the West Coast. After that, I did, again, more staff work. Worked at Marine Forces Pacific in Hawaii. Was selected for Brigadier General after that, and did tours in Education Command, and I was the president of Marine Corps University. Cool. I went overseas and supported Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, so fighting ISIS in the 2014-2015 timeframe out of Kuwait and Iraq. I was Installation Command and Base Commander for Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, for a tour, and then I went over to Okinawa and was in charge of all Marine Corps aviation in the Pacific. I was the first Marine Aircraft Wing Commander over there for a couple years.
Nice.
Then I went to Korea for a couple years as the J5, U5, C5. So I worked for Combined Forces Command Korea, United Nations Command Korea, and U.S. Forces Korea. And so for all three of those commands, I was triple-hatted as the plans and policy and strategic communications lead for the Commander General Robert Abrams. So
cool.
It was a great tour, and that's where I kind of finished up my time, was in Korea, and then, like I said, retired in 2021. So fantastic opportunities that the Marine Corps allowed me to have and allowed me to lead Marines at multiple echelons. And like I said, could not be more proud of my Marine Corps service and more proud of those experiences. And more importantly, with being able to serve with some really, really great Marines, soldiers, civilian Marines. Like I said, great opportunity to be surrounded by awesome people executing every day for the nation.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what ended you getting you back to the Commonwealth of Virginia from Korea? That's quite a bit different, especially when you're like, this Hawaii thing ain't so bad. A little pricey, but
Yeah. We coming out of Korea, we landed in Tampa, Florida. So, but then shortly after I landed there, the opportunity presented itself for Capewell. So Capewell at the time, Capewell and Aerial Machine and Tool were both part of the same company under Capewell. And so I basically moved to both Connecticut and Virginia simultaneously as I would move back and forth between the two locations.
Wow.
And then also had a place in Florida as well. So when we sold the Capewell portions of the business and our overseas subsidiary in the United Kingdom, I moved permanently to Virginia to be close to the facility.
Nice.
So we could continue to move the facility forward.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. We were going to jump right into our first question. So, Thomas, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Dave. And probably if you asked 10 leaders, you get 10 different answers. But
Actually,
I
then
think,
you get asked 10 leaders, will probably get 20 different answers. But
yeah, that's right. I would say, leadership to me means, the ability to basically organize and guide and direct a group of individuals towards a common goal or a common end state. I think, I say that at the same time, I think individuals can have to exercise good leadership, right? You have to, you yourself do those, act a similar way. But I think a good leader is one that's able to understand the people that he's leading and be able to guide and direct them into achieving some type of end state. Desired end state would be the kind of how the military terminology would go, but basically getting them to row in the same direction towards a common objective or a common goal. And I think there's the difference between good leaders and bad leaders is probably the attainment of that goal or that objective at the end, right? A bad leader may not be able to keep everybody aligned on to achieve the objective or to achieve that, get that program, request for proposal submitted, or to achieve that revenue target, or to, win that particular piece of business. Bad leaders probably can't do that stuff, right? They can't keep everybody aligned and rowing in the same direction. Bad leaders have a whole separate series of issues that basically do not get the maximum value out of your people and allow them the best opportunities to succeed and try to tie all that together into a common attainment of an objective. So
nice. Well,
yeah.
One word I picked up on, I love to hear you go a little bit deeper into the topic, but you talked about alignment, and I know that's a huge thing for me. But talk a little bit about the importance of just the alignment of a leadership team and how important that is to just accomplishing the objective.
Yeah, I think alignment's super important, and hand in hand with alignment is probably communication, right? So you have
absolutely 100%.
Always going to be a key component of good leadership is communication, right? That you have avenues to up and down your leadership chain or the chain of command in a military sense, or from the production floor all the way up to to my office in my manufacturing company. You have to have everybody understanding what the purpose is. As Simon Sinek would say, start with why, right? Why is it that we're doing what we're doing, right? And if everybody understands why we're doing what we're doing, then it makes the alignment component that much easier. Everybody knows why they have to do this particular task, or why they have to work on this particular project, or why we need to, to pull this particular financial data, or, why we need to train in a military sense, train for this specific mission set, why we have to do those things. Well, it's because the overall why, the mission of the company or the mission of the unit drives you to have to do those things. And I think much like the military, you have that's the mission of the organization, and then you'll have objectives, and everybody works towards those objectives, and making sure that everybody kind of understands the guidance and direction in those intermediate objectives and those longer term objectives, whether you're in a military sense or whether you're in a commercial sense. I think it's super important that you do that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned about how important communication was, because I mean, to me, I don't see how you can have proper alignment without, especially when you talk about the importance and how crucial looking at research a senior leadership team is to getting the mission accomplished, engagement, just all sorts of factors. I mean, it all really comes from the top. But I can't imagine being aligned and having that same vision and be able to cast that vision without being to really effectively communicate, not just up and down, but just with each other on that, in that core leadership team.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, and for young leaders, it's something they have to work on. And even I work on it every day. When I was in Okinawa as the first mall commander, I had units that were up in mainland Japan. I had units that were in Hawaii. I had units that were across Okinawa. So trying to, to deliver intent, to deliver, specific guidance to them, you have to come up with mechanisms and methods that allow you to make sure that even if you have a disparate workforce or you have a disparate series of commands, that they're all able to get the same message, the same intent, that they understand that intent, and they're able to execute on that intent.
Well, speaking
Even when
about
I was
which,
I was going to
oh,
say,
no,
while I
no,
was
no,
at
go ahead.
Capewell,
No,
while I was at Capewell, it was similar because we had a facility in Hartford, Connecticut. We had a facility in Meadows of Dan, Virginia, right? So, and we had a facility and personnel over in London. So having to keep everybody aligned on the same objective, you have to come up with communication methods, whether that's staff meetings or leadership meetings, or, written correspondence at certain, periodicity, that helps keep everybody in alignment. And also, again, I think they need to have access to you, because they may not understand a piece of your guidance or intent. So their ability to reach back out to you and ask for clarification, you're being open to that, and you prioritize that type of communication with your subordinates, I think is super important as a good leader.
Cool. Well, one thing I pulled out there that I wanted you to maybe flesh out for some of the folks that have never been in the military, never been around the military or fire department or whatever, but flesh out the idea of commander's intent. Because, when I first heard it, I was like, okay, this is just, gold on wheels right here as far as I understand it. So flesh that out just a little bit for those who aren't as familiar with that term.
Yeah, your commander's intent, or it could be your CEO's intent or the fire chief's intent. You'll give typically, here's your intent for the organization. I want this organization to be the premier fighting force in the Western Pacific, able to respond to crisis in a moment's notice, that can execute our war plan functions, et cetera, right? So you issue a series of guidance. Typically in the Marine Corps, that'll be in a format that has like purpose, method, and end state.
Yep.
Different people do commander's intent differently, or CEO's intent differently. But really, it's about those basic guiding principles that you want for your organization, how they will operate, and what really the end state is. Those are all tied towards the end state. And so you issue commander's intent. Sometimes you do it all the time. Sometimes you do it at your weekly staff meetings. I hold a weekly staff meeting at Aerial Machine and Tool, and I start the meeting out by going over my 5 priorities for the year, and here's how we're tracking on those, right? And then I add things that are priorities for the week. We talk about what everybody's doing to work towards those objectives, and so it's a method to align everybody from the lowest manager all the way up through the through the directors. And the same thing when I was in the military, we would hold commanders meetings where we would get all the commanders together, and we would make sure that everybody was aligned on the direction of the organization going forward. And if anybody had any questions or didn't understand what the direction was, they could ask and you could clarify. And then really it's about empowering those leaders to carry out your intent, right? They understand what you want to do and how you want to do it. And so now it's over to them to execute. So
nice. One of the best explanations I heard one time was from a field commander. This is really where it connected and it hit the synapses actually synapsed on this one was when you're talking about purpose, method, end state. And it's kind of like they know the purpose and like what we're actually trying to accomplish. They know what the end, what I intend, what the end state should look like. And then that way, if something happened, they're supposed to, the method is to zig. They get in there like conditions on the ground or change, they can zag, but they end up in the end state. So the purpose and the end state stay the same, but it gives the people that are executing it a lot of freedom to know, I know what the purpose and the end state is. If I have to tweak the methods, at least I have a good reason why. And can kind of justify it. But I thought it was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing like when you talk about strategy, right? It's ends, ways, and means, right?
Yep.
You define the ends, you give them the means, and allow them to come up with the ways and how to get there, right? You may think that it's best to go left, they may think it's best to go right, and in the end, they end up going up the middle. You don't know, but you give them the flexibility. That's again, we talked about good leaders in the beginning. I think good leaders give their subordinates the flexibility to achieve that end state, and if they have to deviate, you trust in them that they're going to do the right thing. They're going to follow your intent, and then they're going to make it happen. And I've always been a fan of letting them move out because they have much better ideas than I do. So
yeah, well, that's why it really kind of ties in. And sometimes they don't end up making the connection, but it ties in so much to lean process improvement. And just because the folks that are closest to the problem normally have the best ideas on how to fix the problem. I love that. And it's kind of giving them the autonomy to kind of, okay, what we're trying to go with this, figure it out. You probably know better how to do it than I do from 6 levels up.
Right. Exactly. I'm a total fan of that. I use it all the time. Closer to the problem is closer to the solution. Right. So we have a number of incentives and things like that in my current company to encourage creativity and innovation. And so when they come up with an idea on the floor that saves time, or it's a faster way to do something, or it develops higher quality, it reduces scrap, whatever the case may be.
Nice.
We certainly encourage those ideas, and the leaders encourage those ideas to bubble up. And the same thing when I was in the military, we would do the same thing, right? Because closer to the problem is closer to the solution. It may not always be, what the higher command is directing. There may be a better way to do things, and most likely there is. And so you just create an environment that allows those ideas to flourish. You don't want to have leaders that say, Dave, that was a horrible idea. I can't believe you came up with such an idea. We're never going to do that ever, right? Because guess what? Dave's never going to come up with an idea ever again.
Nope.
He's never going to open his mouth, right? So,
exactly.
So a lot of it's in, just creating that environment where those kinds of ideas flourish, and you can run them to ground, and you can, the ones that bear fruit, you capture and you implement, and you cross-pollinate through all your different organizations. And that's the kind of environment that really elevates units to the next level. It gives your subordinates buy-in, right? Hey, I came up with this idea, and the boss, took it for action, and now we do it at all of our locations, or all of our companies, or those types of things. So I think that's super important to create that environment.
Oh, that's awesome. I heard one time I was watching speech presentation video, whatever, from Marshall Goldsmith, and I love his books, I love his works, I love his coaching methodology. But it's funny, he was talking. You always hear about people adding value, add value, and he was talking about a topic, and it piqued my curiosity. I don't know, like literally my ear was like, "Are you kidding?" He's like, "Well, let me tell you about adding too much value," and I'm like, all right, I'm down for this one. Like, okay, explain this one to me, Lucy. How do you add too much value? And he talked about an employee coming to you as a leader that had an idea. It was their idea. And I mean, they are jazzed up. They're excited about it. Man, what do you think about this, Thomas? This is awesome. Blah, 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 and you're like, sweet, that's awesome. But have you considered whatever? Anyway, it's like you might say, yeah, but have you considered, or how about they ended up improving the idea 5%, but they've demoralized them as far as now it's your idea because you've given some unsolicited kind of, oh, well, hey, let me make this tweak to it. And you're like, you're adding 5% improvement, ended up taking away 50 to 75% of their motivation to actually execute.
Right.
And I was like, I never really thought about it that way, but that would be an example of adding too much value. Now it's a drudge, and it's the boss's idea, and it's something I have to do, versus when they brought it to you, they're all excited as, hey, this is something I want to do. I get to do.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was also, he was talking about, he had done some consulting work for the Navy, and he did not want to go through the whole paperwork. It's like, hey, we got to pay you. It's like, no, you don't. I'm not trying to deal with the paperwork. I'll just take a ride in one of the airplanes, right? So he went on a carrier. He was talking to one of the admirals, and they were having a discussion. I guess it was one of the guys he was doing some work with. And he talked about how the suggestions were never suggestions. Suggestions were orders.
Yeah.
You're like, when it comes from the Admiral, it's an
Yeah.
order. It's not a, hey, have you thought about, the hey, have you thought about, or, oh crap, that must be what he wants me to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with Admiral General, it doesn't matter. When it comes from the flag staff, it's kind of like, oh, that must be no different than the
Yeah.
CEO. Oh, wow. I guess that's without the communication constantly, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, I guess that's what I need to be doing.
Yeah. And that's super important again for leaders, right? You don't, because a lot of times, I would say something again, whether I was a commander or whether I'm the CEO. And sometimes I'm really iterating with people, right? I would think out loud, and they would, okay, it's got to be that way. And you have to form those relationships where you're like, no, seriously, it does not have to be that way. Let's talk about, let's talk about,
throwing
let's
out
think
ideas.
about, I want you to figure it out, right? It doesn't have to be this way. This is just a thought, and so you do sometimes, I think, have to clarify. And again, that comes to relationship building and how you work with your subordinates and make sure they understand that it's not the knife hand every day from Wheels. You got to do everything he says, because I certainly don't want that to happen.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I've worked with a lot of CEOs, and it's funny because there are two things that I always try to stress. That some already have it in spades, and some are like, hey, that's not a bad idea. But one of them, and both of them kind of go back to something you mentioned. One is talk about the mission of the organization, is making sure every single job description, and we did this a little bit more specifically in a pretty large nonprofit. It's kind of like, let's say their mission was to help people with disabilities, whatever. I'm just being over generic.
Yeah.
Well, how does the janitor or the accounts payable clerk, I'm not helping the clients. I'm not helping, I'm just here, processing spreadsheets and paperwork. But,
right.
It's if you can link every single one of these job descriptions to, I do this so they can do this, so they can do this, so we can help people with disabilities. And they went through it. It was a large exercise.
Yeah.
But they try to go back and link everything. Like, if you don't take out the trash, then it piles up, then this happens, and it's unsafe environment, and we can't do our job. So every single job description ended up linking back to the mission.
Fantastic.
Every single one. And then the other one was, and I was telling her, I said, I swear to God, I'm not trying to blow up the chain of command. So I'm like, don't shoot me when I say this. And I was telling her, one CEO, I was like, but you got to develop some back channel communication. So you're getting like real honest to God, hey, Bill, how's it going? Hey, let's grab some coffee feedback from the front line. I said, without necessarily nuking the chain of command. I said, if you don't, I joke about the best filtration system in the world. And I know unfortunately it's not made by Ariel. I'm sorry. It's, and you got some good ones, but it's better than activated charcoal. It's better than reverse osmosis. I always say the best filtration system in the world is middle management.
Yeah, 100%. Not agree.
Because what you say as CEO, if it's, you get nuked in the employee engagement survey and you're having the senior leadership meetings, it's not going to get down to the frontline staff. Yeah, we're really dropping the ball on this one. We really need to, we have some opportunities,
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, if this guy's department is just, a dumpster fire, he's not going to come, hey, Wheels, guess what? Everyone's leaving, they hate their job, and my whole department's a dumpster fire. That message is never going to get delivered, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
So we talk about having, the back channel communication so you can kind of get a feel of what's going on without necessarily, you're in the hospital administration building, come down 8 stories from where the oxygen is kind of thin to the cafeteria, walk in with the Brooks Brothers suits and ask a whole table full of nurses, well, hey, how's it going? How you like your job here? And they're like intimidated because you're making 60,000, he's making 1.2, and it's kind of like, everything's great, boss. He goes back upstairs. I talked to the staff and everything's going great. It's like, not quite what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that goes a lot to leadership style, right? If you're approachable, if you're personable, if you're humble. I mean, again, when I was in the military, for the time I was, in squadrons, all the way up through when I was a commanding general, I would do in aviation. They do these things called FOD walks, and so every morning, if you're familiar, right? Every morning, the squadron gets out there online and they walk the flight line, pick up any rocks, nuts, bolts, anything that might be, because you don't want that stuff getting sucked into an aircraft engine, right?
No.
So, but at FOD walk, I always found it fascinating because you could tell when I was in a squadron, you could always tell how the squadron was doing, right? As people were coming out to FOD walk, you can look at their actions. Are they joking? Are they smiling and laughing? Before they get put online and,
Yep.
mouths closed, eyes on the ground, move. But you could tell whether people were, the morale in the squadron was good or not. And as a group commander, I would do the same thing. I would go to FOD walk. My senior enlisted, sergeant major would come with me, and we could tell. You could go squadron to squadron. You could go, okay, there's something going on in that squadron. Maybe we need to end up there and do a walkthrough and kind of see how people are doing. In the same sense, I employ the same engagement techniques at my current companies. And I did, getting out on the floor, production floors. First of all, I love to be there anyway, but just getting to know the people and watching what they do and understanding what they do, helping them understand that this is, you're making this vest today. That's part of this ensemble. And, it goes on soldiers who fly over water or, whatever the case may be. Right. But you create that relationship. And I can tell you that, especially at Aerial, there's nobody that won't grab me and tell me what's going on, how they think life is going. So, which I think is fantastic.
That's awesome. That is fantastic because you got that to create that kind of culture. That's intentional. That just does not happen by accident because most people are rather intimidated by the CEO coming out. It's like they see an executive member of management and HR and they go running for the hills. Like, who's getting fired?
Yeah. So it's more like the middle managers go, oh my gosh, what's Wheels doing on the floor? Who's he talking to? Why is he spending so much time over there with that person? But anyway, I think it's all good. And that's how I, kind of sense what's going on. People will tell me if there's something wrong or something they don't like or, something's happening or whatever. And so I think that's super valuable for a leader to have that kind of relationship with their people up and down the chain, right? People will grab me walking down the hallway or people stop into my office, say, hey, can we talk about something, right? And so I think that's the kind of leader you have to be, because if you're not, you're, like you said, you're missing layers upon layers of things that might be happening, bubbling underneath the surface.
100%. I think you're at a disadvantage. I really do. I really think that if you don't create that kind of culture, that you're definitely putting your job is tougher. I mean, you're definitely putting yourself at a disadvantage. So,
right.
With that, this is a good spot to wrap up this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. But we will be back in just a minute with our next two questions.
Great.
Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We are here with our special guest, Wheels, and let's get into our second question. What was the biggest leadership challenge you've had to face?
Yeah, this is again another great question. I think quite frankly, if you ever read or you ever memorized, Teddy Roosevelt's speech when he was at the Sorbonne in 1909.
The man in the arena.
Man in the arena, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about erring, to come up short time and time again. There is no effort without error or shortcoming. So challenges, I think, are part of growing as a leader. There's, I've faced numerous challenges, whether it's, as a small unit leader, as a squadron commander, or as a group commander, or wing commander, or general officer. There's, how you deal with those different leadership challenges is really kind of what sets you apart from other leaders. And I think it's, like I said, it's just part of being a leader. You're gonna be challenged, and you're gonna have times when you're going to need to employ your leadership skills. Something's going to happen, whether it's in your control or out of your control. And the same thing as CEO, there's always challenges that are going on. I think some of the most significant ones for me, at least in my military career, have been around, combat tragedies. When I was in Iraq, we had an aircraft that was shot down. Certainly tested my leadership in terms of the actions we had to take to recover our fallen angels, and everything that kind of went on both during and after. Those types of scenarios, again, you can try to rehearse for what if you have a downed aircraft and all that stuff, but until it happens, that those rehearsals are good. That gets you part of the way, but there's always the crazy Ivan that happens, and you have to deal with that stuff. As being a chief executive officer, same kind of thing, right? It's the meteor strike. It's the thing that happens that you're not prepared for that usually causes the greatest challenges for you. So, not necessarily always a meteor strike. Sometime, when we sold portion of the business, we had to pull the businesses apart. These businesses have been together for 10 years, right? So, kind of separating them. Some of the capabilities of the organization were only in one location, so we had to hire new people. We had to put new processes in place to stand up. The other company is kind of a standalone entity, so huge challenges in doing that, and something I had never done before. Like I said, I come from the military side, and again, I found it personally rewarding to solve those problems, right? Working with the team to solve the problems, put the right people in place. If you ever, read Collins's book about, getting the right people on the bus, we spent a lot of time doing that after the separation. Then we got them into the right seats, and then we got the people that didn't need to be on the bus off the bus. And now we're getting ready. Like I said, we're just at the point now where we're getting ready to drive. So super excited about that. But I think, again, the challenge about what's the biggest challenge you face? That's all scalable, right? Small challenges to very large challenges, and how you deal with those things, I think is the sign of good leadership, right? If you can somehow come out the other end while still maintaining your alignment with your unit's mission or your company's direction, while taking care of your people. Absolutely, I think that's the best you can hope for in some of those.
And it's funny. A couple of things you mentioned is, and the first thing I thought about when you talked about it was a friend that does crisis leadership and crisis communications. And like I said, and it was the same thing when I was in the fire department. He's like, no matter what happens, you're always he calls it going to the basement. He's like, you're always going to go down to the level of your training. And so, you might never have had an actual, bird down, but it's one of those things, but you've trained for it over and over and over. So at least it's not such a surprise that, okay, I can at least get the first couple of things started. But never the same as an experience. I mean, we would train for down trap firefighters all the time. And, you get one that, a friend of mine and we were coming off duty, but we were actually at this big, large, tragic fire that was down in Hampton Roads. I had two guys that they lost a number of years back, but we were pulling in it was an auto parts store. We were actually pulling in at the same time, to pick up an alternator at the same time that the first engines were getting on scene. So we just kind of, hey, what's going on? And it getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually we ended up finding out what was going on, but we were there to kind of watch the whole thing progress. And even though we weren't part of the incident, it was still kind of shocking to be there and see that tragedy. And then you just kind of realize what had happened, and you're like, holy smokes, and you know everything that's going on. You're back there kind of watching it. But same thing, it's no matter what it is, most of the time people aren't, like you said, the meteor strike. Well, he mentioned even with like you're putting on an event and you're on the way there to the weekend festival event, and then all of a sudden you find out on the way there that some guy with malintent or maybe just tore up drunk, plowed in with a car and ran through the whole crowd, and you show up there and you're the coordinator of the event, and all of a sudden you got CNN and NBC and CBS all there with cameras and microphones shoved in your face asking you 1,000 questions. I mean, if you're not ready for that, no matter what the incident is, I mean, that can shut you down. I mean, that's a tough one to not open mouth, insert foot, and say something stupid. But the training aspect of it is huge as far as I think, as far as doesn't substitute for the experience, but at least, okay, we've ran through this before. This is the first time I've at least kind of been exposed to the concept,
Yeah. And I think, my experiences, at least in the military, right, they do a good job of preparing you. And a lot of that is just not only, leadership classes, those kinds of things, and put you in scenarios and all that stuff, but it's the basic experiences, right?
Mm.
If you live life in the aviation community, accidents happen. You watch how other people handle things. Maybe you were in a unit where an accident happened and you lost some people. You watch how your leaders handled themselves. You watch how they took care of the families.
Yep.
Whether it was good or bad, you're putting that in your kit bag, and you know that if that happens to you, you're going to do it differently, or you're going to focus on certain things maybe you thought that didn't get focused on. So you inevitably, as you grow in your military career, just like you did in the fire department, you see things, you remember things. You saw examples of good leadership and bad leadership.
100%.
Even the bad leadership, you learn a lot, right? Because you say, I am not going to do that if I ever go in that situation. And you're going to see good leaders. You're going to go, okay, now I know how to handle that. I wasn't even thinking about that aspect or, that particular thing. So,
Absolutely.
Can't replace experiences. Yeah.
No, I laughed when I first started. I was at kind of this old rickety station that had the cup hooks on the wall, and the checkoff sheets for the engines and the ambulance was kind of, and the ladder trucks kind of on these, clipboards that, were hanging on these cup hooks. In my mind, I always just had this vision of, and it's funny you said that because it was almost identical. So it was like two clipboards, the what to do when I become the boss and what not to do. And you might have a few things on the what to do list, like, hey, that was awesome, I'm going to do that. But man, the what not to do was almost like the old dot matrix printer paper, at tax time. I mean, it just went on forever. It's like, I might not have anything on my what to do list, but if I just do the opposite of the what not to do, like, I'm going to turn out pretty okay, But you're right. There's so much value in the what not to do or what to avoid, or I'm not doing that.
Right.
Huge value.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I said there's no replacement for experiences, right?
No.
So
absolutely not. And it don't have to be yours. Like I said, you put it perfectly. I said, learning from others. I said, watching and observing what other people do and what was good about it, what was bad about it, and kind of where to go from there. So, but I did want to jump into our next question. But what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
Yeah, I think, I would say probably the biggest mistakes, and again, if we're looking in kind of the commercial sense, it's really probably a lack of focus on their people. I mean, again, I'm talking about when I think really about like manufacturing community, right?
Yeah.
If you're making product, right, I see a lot of leaders that are disconnected from the work that actually goes on, right? They stay so focused in their particular silo, their business aspect. They never get down on the floor. And as you said before, connect the dots between, okay, I'm the costing person. Do I get down on the floor and do I watch how it's being made, understand what they're up against, why they can't log into the ERP system and log in and out of their work orders, or why are they doing this? Well, the tablets are broken, or whatever. They just haven't been trained properly, right? So it's making those connections. And I think some leaders I see that not necessarily in our company, and in other businesses that we associate with and whatnot. I think that kind of leaders that lack that connection between the lowest production floor teammate and the your highest vice president or whatever. I think those are where leaders kind of find themselves coming up a little bit short. I think if you can't connect with those layers, and I think communication is another area where leaders, some leaders probably don't do as good in making sure that the message is understood.
Right.
Let's say we deal with a supplier, we're dealing with one person, and then something happens, we're never informed. There's good communication there, but then the leader says, okay, I need to talk to the president, I got a problem, and then hey, he's never talking to his folks who are talking to our folks on a daily basis, or whatever the case may be, right? There's instances where that kind of lack of communication can impact leaders, right? As you already alluded to.
God bless closed loop communication. I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's there for a reason. I mean, it's
yeah.
super big in the medical end of it, especially when you're talking about giving orders and medications and treatment and stuff like
Right,
that. So, I mean, between the physician giving the order or whoever's giving the order, who's actually carrying it out. And, but like I said, it's huge in all aspects, manufacturing. And it's funny you mentioned about silos because, well, I mean, that's one of the biggest time wasters, money wasters, communication wasters. I mean, just and sometimes the way the company sets up its incentives for its different departments, it's kind of you can't blame the department head for hey, I got my KPIs, I got my budget, and as long as I hit my KPIs, I stay under budget, I get my bonus. And then if the incentives aren't built for cross department collaboration, and it's simply their department. Well, they're going to worry about their department, and all of them are not working on, hey, what are we doing together to grow the overall company revenue? Right? It's just,
right.
okay, I'm worried about getting my bonus and Mama going to Hawaii because I'm not trying to sleep on a couch if I don't get my bonus and Mama doesn't go to Hawaii again this year.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you can't blame them. That's the way the incentive structure was set up. But you're right, getting that communication, and it's easy to get into sales of this and production is that, and we got to get this much product out the door. And I mean, it's easy to get tunnel vision on that and miss the connection with the people. And like I said, it's like you said, get siloed into that. It's all about the numbers, the production, the units, and then miss it's the people part that are actually getting this done. So
right,
I
right.
like how you mentioned that because it is easy. You can't blame anybody for it necessarily. You got to intentionally kind of take yourself out of that and get a bigger picture to intentionally try to make those connections and put those pieces together. Because, I mean, it's one thing I love about working with manufacturing is that you got a lot of action oriented, we're making stuff and getting stuff done kind of people. There's not a whole lot of let's figure it out by committee. Let's think about it. Let's, a whole lot of fluff talk. It's kind of like, we got to get some numbers out the door.
Yeah,
We got to
yeah,
get stuff done. And, kind of that bias to action, which is always, good to be around those kind of folks.
yeah. And I think, it's a little easier in smaller companies than, a Lockheed Martin or something like that, right? Where there's just so many people in such a big silo. It's hard to get out. But if you're in smaller companies, it's easier to do that kind of cross coordination. And we do, again, we're a smaller company, so like when we come together for a project, we bring in everybody's impact on that thing, on that particular project or that proposal or whatever the case may be. And let's get all hands on deck. Let's figure it out. Let's make sure everybody's working together. There's inevitably a good idea from a place you didn't expect it, or somebody's bringing up a good point that, hey, yes, we definitely need to consider that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of trying to bring people together to solve problems, right? Because no one person has all the answers. The power is in getting everybody together and talking it through. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'll throw this out there too, then we'll wrap up this segment and come back with our final question.
Yeah.
But to me, when you're talking about the way my mind works and I'm thinking about it and visualizing it, when you're talking about the bigger companies, it could be a Lockheed Martin, it could be a Berry Global. It doesn't matter, whether you're making plastic bottles or bombs, almost.
Right.
When you get to be that big, it's almost the real concentration on what you're talking about is almost at the individual plant level.
Right.
Exactly. And sometimes they call that person a CEO. Sometimes they call that person the plant manager. I mean,
Right.
and any variation in between, but they still fill that same chief executive for the plant role, no matter what they call them. But I mean, to me, I look at getting the alignment, the connections, the everything that we talked about at the plant level is super impactful.
Yep, I could not agree more. Yep.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Well, we will wrap up this second segment of Conversations of Leadership on Dr. David. We will be back in just a few minutes and we will get into our final question. See you in a bit. Welcome back to our final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we're going to jump into our last question. So, Wheels, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
Yeah. I think, depends on, leaders. Again, coming up in the Marine Corps, there was always this leadership trait, which you had to know yourself and seek self-improvement, right? And I think that holds true whether you're a young leader or whether you're a senior leader. And so being able to be introspective of where your own shortfalls are and then developing plans yourself to address those shortfalls, right? So, for example, when I was uh, transitioning to the civilian, sector, and I was coming into a company, I was completely lost on the finance side of it, right?
Yeah.
You know, profit
Well, because
loss statements and those kinds of things, right?
and
I mean,
I'm
yeah,
gonna pick on you a little bit and just be
yeah,
overgeneralization and facetious, okay? But
yeah.
in the military, money just appears out of magic, right? I mean, it just poof, like the magic, Pentagon fairy just dumps money on.
Yeah, well, as a commander, you usually have a budget, right?
I
And
know,
you have a certain amount. Yeah,
I know, I'm just
yeah,
picking. It's like sales and generating revenue is typically not high
yeah.
on the priority list.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
That's
it's
what
all
I'm
about
joking about.
spending. It's not about, making. So anyway, it was an area that I was deficient on. So again, I had to do a lot of self-study. I spent a lot of time with our, CFOs trying to learn more, trying to understand kind of the monthly close package, trying to know what to look for, those kinds of things, really trying to understand, profitability and costs and price and, the differences between all those things and, material, labor, and overhead and how it all works and how it's recorded and what's the integrity of those recordings. Yeah, so I think it's really about knowing yourself and seek self-improvement. So that's the best way for leaders to address, how they continue to be better leaders is to understand where your shortfalls might lie and how to, develop a plan to address those things. Now, some folks, you may use external sources to help you, right? You could have a coach help you. You may do surveys to understand kind of where your personality fits and where you might have shortfalls or areas that you could improve upon. There's all kinds of tools that are available to commanders as well or CEOs to help them kind of really understand where they might have some of those gaps. You could do 360 surveys, right, where you have folks give you an honest and open assessment of your performance. And like I said, it may be totally surprising where, hey, I thought it was super strong in here when like everybody or people says, yep, you're not.
Yeah.
So those are areas where you need to work. I think I'm the best communicator ever. And like, people say, nope, I never know what's going on, um, so having those feedback loops, those feedback mechanisms, super important to a leader. And I think what's most important is not necessarily just the mechanism, it's acting on what comes out of that, right? So if you find that you have shortfalls and your people are telling you you have shortfalls, then the best way to build trust with your folks and all that stuff is to work on those things, right? It does you no good that, okay, everybody, is not happy about X and you don't do anything about X. Then they're like, well, I'm never going to take a survey again because I spent, 15 minutes writing everything out and the boss didn't do anything about it, right? So that's the easiest way to, to get people out of alignment, right? We talked
Yep.
about alignment in the beginning, right? So you have to match your actions have to match the words, right? And so that's, I think, super important also is to have those feedback mechanisms and act on it.
Correct.
So to be a better leader, I think that's another area where you can focus.
And I almost think, to be honest with you, it almost does more harm than good. If you ask for the feedback and they put their heart and soul into giving it to you, and then you don't act on it, like I said, you'd have been better off if you never asked. To be honest with you, now all of a sudden you shot yourself in the foot, and you're like, yeah, I'm never going to do, like you said, I'm never going to do that again. And, Merry Christmas trying to figure out how to get to you. It's like pulling eye teeth, trying to get any idea out of them again, like you said about one smackdown or one whack-a-mole. And, well, that was a dumb idea. I'll never do that again. Like I said, it only takes that one time and you're like, just shut down, for a long, long time. And, and you don't see everything. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're military, corporate, fire department, whatever. I mean, a lot of eyes are a whole lot better than one pair of eyes, and everybody sees things that you don't see, and being able to get that feedback. gentleman I was telling you about, that Rich Gasaway that I interviewed recently, that's big into the situational awareness. He was doing a program for industry, and they had actually, I think it was a wildland firefighter. Maybe it was at California or something. Anyway, did a program for the leaders, did a program for the front line, and the program for the leaders. Oh yeah, they're open, and people can tell us feedback, and oh yeah, we've got a great environment, and they tell us everything. Went to go do the and asked the front line, like, there's no way in heck we would ever tell them. Like, they had like 300 people, and like, who would ever feel comfortable with giving some feedback back to your boss about if you saw a safety issue, you saw something? Maybe 6 to 8 hands out of 300 or 400, right? And then one of them kept his hand up, and he's like, I didn't ask another question. What gives? And so he asked, okay, what? He said, well, I wanted to qualify what I said. Yeah, I put my hand up that I would give some feedback, but it would really depend on who I'm giving the feedback to. Like, most of them I wouldn't. There's 1 or 2 I might. He was like, so let's just say that report back to the leadership was like, yeah, what you were saying yesterday. Let's have a talk.
Yeah. And I do think it's important too, if you do engagement surveys and stuff like that, is that you also, the leader, like I said, I would always grab the special sauce, right? The middle managers, and let them know how we did, right? Hey, we have some shortfalls here, shortfalls in this. These are areas we need to work on. Here's some things you could do to kind of shore these up with your teammates, right? And so I think it's important that they know as well, right? And so you talk about ways to help mitigate those things in addition to you taking action as the leader.
Well, one thing I personally, I have been a huge fan. You were talking about assessments, 360s, assessment tools. I'm a huge fan. It took about 1.5 years for me to find a company that I actually could hang my hat on, because most of the ones out there, I couldn't go to bed at night and actually sleep with a clear conscience with a research-based Ph.D. using an assessment that was the statistical equivalent of what's your spirit animal on Facebook, right? I mean, some of them are fun, but some of them are just crap. And the ones I ended up kind of landing on for the lion's share, they're ugly as sin, but the research department is what sold me on them. And I was kind of giving them a hard time, and they were like, I was on the phone, when I was doing my due diligence, and they're like, oh, these things aren't valid or reliable. They're this or that, they're the other. And they've heard it, hey, check your email. I'm like, for what? Oh, I just sent you over a 110-page statistical compendium on all 30 years of validity and reliability research. I'm like, all right, you got me. So, I mean, I looked at that and I'm like, all right, these guys are bringing receipts. I don't care how ugly the reports are, right? This is, and it's funny, when I did my dissertation, you were talking about what people think and what they do. I ended up using a different assessment. I think the multi-factor leadership questionnaire is one that's big into Bass and Avolio, big research stuff. Anyway, long story short, it was a 360 one. And part of that was your leadership style, laissez-faire versus, transformational versus whatever. Didn't care about that. One component, self-report, did leadership effectiveness. Well, I did it as a 360 because they have that option. And when I was measuring a certain trait against their leadership effectiveness to see if they correlated, I didn't care what the leader said. I cared what the people said. There's 4, 5, 6 people that were around and said, how do they see them? And I measured that average of leadership effectiveness. How do your people see you as effective versus that? The reason I mentioned it, it was fascinating. I didn't realize there was this whole line of research into that gap. Like, like the bigger the gap, like a lot of times, males may have a bigger gap between, hey, this is where I think I'm the best thing since, sliced bread and the second coming. And your people are like, no, you ain't. And the closer that gap is, the better, male or female. And then a lot of times they found out it was just an anomaly that sometimes females will say, I don't think I'm that great. And there are people like, man, you're awesome. So it's just that interesting about the issues and whatever between that gap in leadership effectiveness between where people thought they were self-report versus their team. And the ones that were just literally just knock it out of the park were the ones that it was almost identical.
Yeah.
That was just really cool. For whatever that's worth.
No, I mean, I think it is because when I first got to Capewell, we had a coach and we had all of the leaders were evaluated, and we could see where they, on the dice chart, I think it was, and where everybody fell out. And so you then knew what the way certain folks like to receive feedback or the way certain people deal with adversity or, whatever, right? So you're like,
Exactly.
okay, that guy is, he's in a certain, he's part of the 12 o'clock group, right? He's very, knife hand, directional, that kind of thing. He's not a, compassionate, person. So, okay, got to deal with him a little bit differently.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was one of the good things the Marine Corps did, I think, too. When you go to War College, one of your educational experiences, they'll do, Myers-Briggs. And so, I'm an ISTJ with the rest, most of the rest of the Marine Corps. But you learn a lot about yourself, right? Because I think that's super important. How you what your tendencies are and what, are you introverted or extroverted? Okay.
Yeah.
Not that one's worse than the other, but you understand why certain people like to perform and like to work, with the door closed. Some are like open, like to have, lots of people running in and out, right? Both are okay. It's just understanding that about yourself and about your people.
And that's the thing. When your whole senior leadership team really deeply understands that about each other and understands how everybody likes to give and receive information and how people come across under stress and not even realize it, that whole dynamic, it just really breaks down a lot of barriers I found. And that's a great way to really get everybody on the same page and talk about getting people online, because now all of a sudden they know how and why to communicate back and forth with each other. But with that, tell our listeners how they can connect with you, connect with Ariel on LinkedIn. However, they're like, hey man, I like this wheels guy. How do I get some more of that? Tell them.
I'm obviously on LinkedIn. Ariel Machine and Tool, arielmt.com is our website. And again, you can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. So yeah, certainly, yeah, connect.
Sounds great. Well, we will link all of that down below. And with that, thank you. Appreciate your time. And
thanks for having me, Dave. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Yeah. And we will see you guys next time on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. Take care.